Tariff Tantrum. Trump plays Yosemite Sam with the global economy. And, you know, I say Yosemite Sam. Remember, I mentioned this yesterday. Remember Yosemite Sam from the old Warner Brothers cartoons? He would chase Bugs Bunny around with a shotgun, you know, blam, 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 blowing holes in the walls and the windows and the ceiling. Never managed to hit the rabbit. That's what Trump is doing. He's just blowing holes everywhere. He's blowing things up, and it's not going to work. I mean, it's just because he's doing it the wrong way. Now, yes, tariffs are an important part of economic policy for any country. There's virtually not a country in the world that doesn't have some tariffs on some things. You do that to protect domestic industries, but you do it to protect specific domestic industries. And that's why there's basically two ways to do tariffs. The first way is what you do when you're in a war. When Putin invaded Ukraine, we entered essentially a Cold War with Russia. And so what did we do? We used tariffs to punish Russia. We said, you know, we're going to put, you know, there were sanctions as well as tariffs. So when you put tariffs on a country, that's typically considered an act of economic warfare. And you don't want to do that anyway. Like, you know, for example, putting a tariff on Mexico. Well, you know, maybe we would love to get our car manufacturing back from Mexico. Maybe we'd like to get our electronics assembly back from Mexico. But do we really want to put a tax on Mexican coffee? We buy 60 million kilos of Mexican coffee every year. We don't grow coffee in the United States. So no, we don't want to tax Mexican coffee. But if you put a tax on everything coming out of Mexico, you just raise the cost of a cup of coffee in every restaurant and every, you know, living room and kitchen in America. How is that smart? What Trump is doing is putting tariffs on countries instead of products. There are 17,000 categories of tariffs over on the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, or not Chamber of Commerce, Department of Commerce's website, the Commerce Department's website. And they're very granular. There's like 740 different categories just of steel. Rolled steel, flat steel, bar steel, round steel, steel ingots, steel this, you know, carbon steel. Every single one of them has a different tariff. But that's not how Trump is doing. I mean, that's how you appropriately do tariffs. You say, okay, which industries in the United States are really industries that we want to keep here or bring back here? Then let's put tariffs on those products, not on countries, but on the products. But what Trump did, what his advisors did, I mean, and this is particularly insane. Like, you know, for example, the average tariff on U.S. goods from the European Union is around 3%. Depending on, you know, whether or not you're including cars, it could arguably be as high as 5.6%. But we're putting, like, you know, a much, much larger tariff than that on the European Union. Why? Because Trump didn't actually look at tariffs, or for that matter, non-tariff barriers to trade, like he said he did, like he claimed he did. Instead, what they did was they took the trade deficit that we have with a country, or in this case, the European Union, the trade deficit we have, and divided that by the, here, let me get this. They took the trade deficit, so for example, and divided it by that country's exports to the U.S. So for example, we have a $17.9 billion trade deficit with Indonesia. This is from James Serwecki. We have a $17.9 billion trade deficit with Indonesia. Its exports to us are $28 billion. 17.9 divided by 28 is 64%, which Trump claims is the tariff that Indonesia charges us. When in fact, the tariff that Indonesia is actually charging us is, you know, radically lower than that. It's in single digits. So he's not even doing it right? He's doing it stupidly. And this is why Democrats need to boil this message down to something very, very simple. Oh, there's one other piece to this before I get to the Democratic message. And that is that the law says that only Congress can pass tariffs. And you have Maria Cantwell and Chuck Grassley, the Republican from Iowa, proposing legislation this morning to take away from Trump his tariff-setting abilities. Last night, you had the Senate vote 52-48 with Rand Paul, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and Mitch McConnell joining the Democrats to declare that the emergency that Trump declared at the beginning of his term in office, which gives him the power to impose these tariffs, is over. Never should have been, because there was no economic emergency before Trump came into office. We had the best economy in the world, literally, according to The Economist magazine, and the lowest inflation rate and the lowest jobless numbers in half a century. But here we are. So the Democratic message needs to be, number one, Congress should be imposing tariffs, not Trump, so that they can do it thoughtfully. And number two, tariffs should be on products, not on countries. Imposing tariffs on entire countries is an act of war. Imposing tariffs on products is an act of economic self-preservation. And Trump obviously doesn't know the difference, and his advisors don't know the difference. And Democrats need to educate people about this. I realize that, typically when you make a political argument that includes nuance, it's a losing argument. But this, I don't think this is. I think people understand this. I'm telling you, having grown up in the Midwest, I grew up in Michigan. We learned about tariffs literally in elementary school, like 4th and 5th grade civics. Anybody from any manufacturing part of the country knows what is going on. Democrats need to take this opportunity.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And now Musk says Social Security arrests coming. I'm guessing the Department of Justice is not real happy with him. We'll talk about that right after the break. Stick around.